fear is a state of mind. It blocks us from being useful. It blocks us also from being ourselves. And I never, ever wanted to do that. This is what I said to Adrienne. It's a freight train and it's going to move, and I want you with me. We have one go at this world. And when I'm given clear instruction of who I am, I'm going to take that and I'm going to go with that.
And to the partner experience, I was continuously pacing behind, trying to jump up on that train and never quite grasping at the right moment. And I didn't have time for fear. I literally didn't have time to live in the what ifs, because I was staying very focused on the moment. I believe that that practice is important for all of us in respect to any kind of living. And that's where the expansion of heart, mind, body, and soul took place, even when it's hard.
What do you really know about people who were born transgender? Have you ever met someone who's transgender? Well, if you're like me, you're curious but hesitant to ask questions. Well, welcome to Demystifying the Transgender Journey. In our conversations with people who were born transgender, their families, friends, and the professionals who support them, we ask probing questions and discover insightful and educational answers. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. Now let's get right into today's episode. Welcome to another episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. I'm Lynn Murphy, author, speaker, leadership coach, and founder of Women Who Push the Limits, and I'm the cisgender half of your host team. The transgender half of our team is the amazing Wendy Cole, a gender diversity consultant and speaker who affirmed her gender at the age of 67, which proves it's never too late to be your authentic self. Now, today's conversation brings us into a deeply human story, one about identity, partnership, and what it really means to grow together through change and challenge. Our guests are Jessika Janene and her wife, Adrienne Wehr, a couple whose journey together challenges what many people assume about relationships, gender, and resilience. Jessika is a creative director and storyteller with a collaborative spirit and sharp creative instincts, and has more than 25 years of experience shaping powerful narratives across healthcare, technology, and cultural spaces. Her work is rooted in empathy, clarity, and connection. And those same qualities have guided her personal journey as a transgender woman, one that begins later in life, in her 50s, and continues to evolve. Jessika is driven by a simple belief that authenticity is powerful, and that the more we tell our stories, the more we help others live fully as themselves. And Adrienne is a multidisciplinary artist and community builder whose work spans film, storytelling, and cultural engagement. From her time with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood to her award-winning contributions to independent film and the arts, Adrienne has dedicated her life to creating meaningful human connections through story. And together they offer something that we don't nearly hear enough about, what it looks like not for just one person to transition, but for the relationship to transition to. And they speak openly about love, trust, identity, and what it takes, the ongoing work of building a life together in spite of change, not in spite of change, but because of change. So Jessika, Adrienne, welcome. We're so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for welcoming us to be here. We're very much looking forward to being in conversation with you.
Yes,
Well,
thank you for having us.
Thank you. You know, we've talked to many guests on this podcast, and we often hear their stories of relationships that struggle and mostly even end when one partner transitions. But your story really offers us a different perspective. Not that your story is without challenges. It's a story of doing the work to grow your relationship as it changes. And I've used the word rare. At least it's rare in our experience of the people that we've interviewed. And what really stood out to us when we spoke before was this idea that there aren't just one or two journeys happening, but three: Jessika's journey, Adrienne's journey, and the we, as you say, of your relationship. And that we journey, how it evolves, how it stretches, and how it's tested is really an important part of this conversation for our listeners who probably are trying to understand what the transgender experience looks like from both sides. So, Jessika, why don't you start by giving us some of your background, how you grew up, what your early life was like, and really understanding that you didn't transition until you were in your 50s, or I would say awaken. You use the word awaken, but I'll let you tell your story.
It's a long one, but to make it succinct, I'll start with sort of the end. Well, not the end, the new beginning. My egg cracked in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. I'm a pandemic trans baby. My therapist said, it's the perfect time. If you're going to do this, now's the time. If you're going to figure out who you are, what gender journey you're on, now's the perfect time. So it started there. But in hindsight, looking back to my childhood, I could point to various and, lots of indicators of sort of questioning my gender from a really early age. Back then, in the early 70s, late 60s, that there wasn't that space for that, especially as a child. I think parents would have been thought of as not caring if they were allowing their child to have a gender journey like we see now. So, it was, I don't want to say discouraged, but I grew up in a Catholic family and not really super religious, but also this was out of the norm. And there was a point early in my life where my mother had a great friend who was a priest, Catholic priest. And I'd spent a lot of time with my mom as a young baby or as a young toddler, just because that's the way it was then. There wasn't daycare. And I spent a lot of time with my mom, and she was very involved in the church and very active on parent council, on, helping the church function and the rectory function. And at one point, a Catholic priest said to her, your son needs to get away from all these women. Because I was with my mom, her sisters, all the ladies at the church. And this is like 1970. And when I came out to my mom, I said, back then when I was in kindergarten child, why did this priest say this to us, to get me away from women? And I said, was it because he thought I was going to be gay or something? I was like, what was going on? And my mom said, no. And this is basically on her deathbed. She said to me, no, it was because he thought that you were, a bit of a sissy back then. Huh. And, I grew up as a guy, but as a child, I think my natural tendency was towards the soft, towards the feminine. I loved hanging around with women. I always had. So this journey is complicated. But I was struck one morning this almost sounds typical boilerplate. I was struck one morning in 2020, working from home during the pandemic. I was struck one morning in a massive, deep depression. I went back to bed and then, called off working, told my partners I wasn't going to be around. Went back to bed, got up in the afternoon, kind of alone. Adrienne was living in Florida with her mom, who was convalescing. And I was coming down the stairs in our house from our third floor where our bedroom is. And I have a mannequin hanging from the ceiling. Now it's an art piece, and it's hanging from the ceiling like a display. So I pushed her out of the way as I came down the staircase. I pushed her out of the way, and I had this white flash of light, this moment, and I was struck. And the feeling that I was left with was, maybe you should try on some stockings. Maybe you should try on some different clothes this morning. Now, I wasn't a cross-dresser. I'd done like cross-dressing, like Halloween stuff and whatnot, or for fun or for a joke or whatever in my lifetime, of course. But I wasn't a cross-dresser. But this thought prompted me to go to Adrienne's closet room, as we call it. And I tried on some stuff that is, her size, but that would fit me. And two things happened. I was instantly catapulted out of this depression, which I think I was when the white light moment hit me. But there was this sense of I had arrived somewhere, and then followed by, oh no, I finally lost my mind. This is it. This is like cabin fever. And this is I don't know. I've been away from Adrienne. At this point, it was months. It didn't settle well, but then it felt so right. And what I did from that point on somehow was I was cross-dressing here at home, working in my office, this room right here, and having basically two personas. Now, we were all in bubbles back then.
Mm-hmm.
My bubble here, we live in Pittsburgh. My bubble here in Pittsburgh was myself, one friend here, the computer, of course, and then my mom and my sister and brother-in-law lived about 100 miles away from me. And my mom was in hospice at home. And so that was my bubble. And so I had this really confined, when I said like I was here, cabin fever, I really was. I was here with my two cats, and Adrienne was in Florida with her mom, who was also going through sort of end of life moments. So in that mist, I thought, okay, it's the pressure from work. It's the weirdness of being alone all the time. It's a kink. Obviously, it's a kink that I never knew. I wasn't like struck like trans journey immediately. I went to Adrienne in December, which is like 4 weeks later. So I cross-dressed for 4 weeks. I went to Florida. This is the height. This was when I got on at 737. I think there were like 6 people on it.
Yeah.
And people had like double rubber gloves and hazmat suits on practically. I flew to Florida like that. It was the easiest flight I've ever had. And it was Christmas and everything was hitting the fan. And I came to Adrienne and I said to her, she's the first person I told, of course. I told her the story. I said, I don't know what's going on. I think I might be non-binary or I'm something. I need to find out what's going on because this thing feels so right. And I think I'm losing, control. I think I'm losing my mind here. And the first thing she said to me is, you have to find out what this is.
Wow.
Now, we've been through a lot in our lives to this point, right?
How long had you two been together at that point?
We met, had a love at first sight experience in 1998.
And this was 2020.
This was 2020.
So, yeah, and that was amazing. I think I answered your question. It's a long story, but that's sort of like this snapshot. It's so, I find either people have known their whole lives.
Yeah, a lot of people I've interviewed.
Or they've been like me, where like it happens and I was struck with like.
Mm-hmm. So you never told anyone as a child? Your parents, friends, anybody? You never verbalized that?
No, I never knew. You know, the whole thing of like the priest saying that I was a sissy, my mom said, when I asked her, I said, well, what did you think? And she said, you were sensitive and you liked being around women. And I, I always did. Even when I was expressing myself as male, I preferred the conversation that was happening with the girls. My mom had 5 sisters and they were all Croatian, first generation, all spoke Croatian, all sat around my mom's kitchen. So the 6 of them drinking coffee, smoking, maybe having some wine or maybe some beer.
Doing each
other's hair, talking. And the husbands would normally be like in the garage or with my dad or somewhere. And me as a little kid, I wanted to be right there with the girls. The conversation was better. The emotion was real. The stuff I was feeling was there in that room, and it was never there with any man.
Exactly. And I lived my entire male life that way, preferring to be with the women.
Yeah. But you didn't have a sense that you were transgender, or were you even aware of what that term meant?
Not as a child, no.
Yeah.
I think probably in high school was the first time, I met a drag performer who was on tour. My mom was working at this like hotel that had cabaret performances, and they intrigued me. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. You could express yourself like this. And I had done one of my favorite stories is I think I was in 3rd grade and my sister dressed me as a girl.
Oh, wow.
This is my sister who is 3 years older than me. I also have
Okay.
a sister that's 10 years older, but my sister was 3 years older than me, dressed me as a girl, and we went to school for Halloween. And
Mm-hmm.
I was, I look like a girl.
And how did that feel?
It was felt amazing
Yeah.
until I went to the bathroom.
Uh-huh.
And I went in the bathroom, and there was always this nun, Sister Anne, who always had a yardstick. She was out like sort of in the foyer. I went in the bathroom, and I think she saw me go in. And I went in the boys' room, and she came in there after me with that yardstick
Oh no.
and didn't believe who I was.
Oh wow.
I had like a little sailor outfit on.
Yes, I remember those.
I loved it,
We all had those.
but I think I got hit. But I definitely got scolded.
Who did she think you were?
I don't know.
But it was quite a transformation at that point. You easily
yeah, I
moved
mean-
into that space.
It was. And, I've always had this, I always thought it was a fetish with, certain female figures in my life. I don't know, an unhealthy attraction to Elizabeth Montgomery, which is really funny because I know another trans woman who had an unhealthy attraction to Tabitha, who was Samantha's daughter in Bewitched.
Yep.
But I had, every time Bewitched would come on, I would like have these special feelings. And I always thought it was like, growing up as a boy, I thought, oh, it was because I was attracted to her. Like it was like sexual. It had nothing to do with sex.
You wanted to be her.
She was like everything I wanted in a weird way that I didn't understand. And, I could go back again to childhood where, there was a first Holy Communion happening when I was a little, Catholic kid. And we're on one side, all the boys are on one side and all the girls are on the other side. I remember us in the front row, and it's a hot day and it's first Holy Communion. All the girls are over there instead with us. And I have on this horrible like rayon suit or something like that. But I remember the button-on tie and just feeling horrible, shoes that dug into my ankles. And I'm looking over at the girls, and they have white veils on and these little delicate gloves and
ankle socks,
white leotards or ankle socks and these little dresses. And I was just like,
oh yeah.
Yeah. You wanted to be on that side dressed like that.
Exactly.
because I just felt like this thing. And when you have that thought as a young boy, you don't know what to do with it. And there wasn't like child therapy in 1972 or whenever it was. I mean, I had first Holy Communion.
You couldn't talk to a priest about that, could you?
Oh.
No. I don't think so. I mean, you probably could, but you would probably be stopped.
Yeah, we would be routed in another direction.
Yeah, no good would have come from that.
Yeah, but it's super alarming. And for me, it was super alarming to discover this and make the connections between those really old feelings from childhood and current feelings as a, what was I then, 53-year-old executive.
Because we are born this way.
Yeah. When I told my writing partner on an agency, when I told my writing partner, who I was in a relationship with for 14 years, and in a relationship where really varied relationship to the point where I would kid with him a lot. And I told him, when I came out, and he was like, yeah, right. Like Jessika, you're the most guy I know. Of course, he didn't call me Jessika. And which was kind of true. And I didn't mask it like a lot of other trans women I know who were like in the Navy or in the reserves or doing really butch jobs. I was an ad person, but I'm also still a motorcyclist and I'm
a builder,
a motorhead,
but always an artist.
Yeah, an artist, but always a motorhead and always somebody that communicates and enjoys that sort of stuff.
Well, it sounds like you cross both genders very easily. You get the things that we think of as binary, as the manly things, and then the more feminine things.
Yeah, which in the beginning of transition is a real struggle to juggle.
Absolutely.
You don't know, like, oh, can I still like this stuff? Can I be this person?
Yeah.
But I needed to find a true identity for me. And they're searching, there's the thing that we all do, I think, as young trans people, like not young, but early in your transition, is we try a bunch of different stuff on, really, high femme, like no femme, all the things.
Before you go into too much depth there, I want to add that I am somebody who has always been drawn towards more feminine males in my relationships. And so it was always interesting for me to hear that other people had viewed her as a guy, because I never did. It was one of the more appealing aspects of her essence when I met her, that she had a very strong feminine core and had physical feminine qualities as well. She had very long hair when I met her, and we had a lot of interests that were very much aligned, but we had a way of communicating together that was much more reminiscent for me of the way that I communicate with my female friends. So for me, that says that the feminine principle is alive in somebody. And I believe we all have both aspects,
Right.
and ought to allow for both aspects to flourish, but conditioning pulls us in other directions. So yeah, one of the things that drew me to her happened to be her feminine side.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little about your background, where you were coming up to the point where Jessika had her awakening.
I'll go back to childhood just a little bit. I was an only child, and I would say a very always curious child, and adventurer in the understanding of wanting to know and understand what life was about. That's always been part of me from the beginning, and an artist of many disciplines as a child, and that has carried through my entire lifetime. It's a way that I like to express myself, create stories, tell stories, and offer my truth to the world in artistic fashion. I've had an interesting professional life. As you had mentioned, Lynn, at one point I was an associate producer for Mr. Rogers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I had grown up watching him, and I always loved those school days when I got to stay home from school and watch Mr. Rogers, because I always felt like he was just talking to me. And that was years later, I would learn that was part of the whole psychology. There was a lot of psychology involved behind that program. And that was a piece of it, to allow the child to feel very seen and valued and heard. And I always described that program as a very quiet oasis on a very loud television dial. And we don't have television dials anymore, but we have a lot of noise out here on screens. And I really love the resurgence that we've seen around Fred Rogers. I mean, those of us who worked with him are kind of astounded by it all, because during the years that we were producing the program, we certainly had a following, but it wasn't massive. It really wasn't. And people either loved the program or they didn't. And I think in this time, people are viewing Fred Rogers and what he brought in a very much more open-hearted way, and understanding that those very universal teachings that he gave to us are really important, especially right now. And there's an evergreen quality to them. It doesn't matter what era we're living in. So it's been great to see his kindness being called radical kindness, but kindness is not radical.
It shouldn't be.
What's radical is that we're not all operating out of kindness. I find that to be radical. So
it's radical in certain circles.
So let's see, moving it forward, I had never been married before. I didn't think I was going to be married. Was pretty footloose, fancy free, and independent, and was kind of struck dumb when I was struck by a love at first sight experience, which was when I met Jessika in 1998. So it was astonishing to me, radical, that I would ask her to marry me a month later. And I
Wow.
You took the first step.
I took the first step, and she was
In 1 month.
in 1 month.
I was in the midst of a divorce. I was separated, and we were, I was just on the verge of signing papers and completing it, and with no plans ever of getting in a relationship, let alone being married ever again. And my plans changed.
Yeah, there was a sort of knowing
Yeah.
that washed over both of us. I mean, we have wedding rings that we designed ourselves. You can see there's a eternal spiral, and she's got hers on too.
Beautiful.
There's a hematite stone in the middle, and there's kind of a Celtic knot on the back.
I love it.
Which our jeweler added, but Jessika and I drew the design of these on a bar napkin while we were planning for our wedding. There are 3 words that are inside here that kind of really set the foundation for our relationship, where we began and what it still is today. The night that we had met, and we met at a lovely art happening, and I walked into this opening and caught her glance from across the urban garden that was in the entryway, and it was so powerful, this sight line with each other, and there was this sense of light in that moment, and the first word is light. We both caught each other stealing glances at one another throughout the evening, throughout the crowd, and then ultimately a mutual friend of ours who happened to be my talent agent at that time drew us together to introduce us for professional reasons, not to fall in love and get married and have this journey together. But we were talking to one another, and it was this uncanny sense of remembrance. So the second word is remember. And then the third word is found. It was as if we had remembered one another from another lifetime and had ultimately found each other in this one. So that is at the core of who we are, and remains at the core and heart of who we are today, many years later, after many peaks and valleys. And when she came to Florida to share the news of this thing that had awakened in her, I mean, remember, it was pandemic times. I thought she was just coming down to see us, as my mother was in her final chapter of life too. It was a tough haul for both of us to have to be separated by so many miles at that time, but she had to be here for her mother. I had to be there for mine. And so I thought she was just coming to reunite, in the midst of the pandemic, and it was dangerous to fly. So I thought, wow, you're taking a risk.
I was, but
yeah,
there was other stuff too.
But I noticed, from the start, I picked her up at the airport, and she was troubled. There was something going on, and very closed off about it. And I couldn't understand what was happening. So I spent a lot of time observing her and feeling her distance, her agitation, her just being very withdrawn. Finally, when we took a walk on the beach, I prompted her, and I said, look, what's happening? What is this? And very haltingly, her story came forward. And I did express what she shared with you, you need to find out what this is. And at the same time, I had no idea what kind of door had just been flung open for either one of us. I did not know what this was. We knew very few transgender individuals in our life at that time. We certainly knew nothing about the experience of being trans in the world or part of a trans family. There was a lot of not knowing. And my emotions were very much a swirl at that moment, and in the time that would follow. Though we had It was sort of strange blessing that we did have the thousands of miles between us,
The separation, yeah.
because it allowed each of us. And I love, Lynn, that you brought the 3 journeys to bear, because we recognized that right off the top. That
You recognized it.
Jessica's journey was going to be different than mine, but then we had the collective we journey together.
The first time I heard that was from her when she said that to me,
and
which was interesting,
And that makes perfect sense, because I've always said to people that if you transition, your spouse and your entire family has to transition with you.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And so, the distance gave each of us an opportunity for reflection, for personal discovery, for time to research. We're both research hounds, and she was already ahead of me, and I was perpetually pacing behind, both emotionally and just intellectually across the board. And the distance helped us. It really helped us.
Yes.
Especially in those early days when there's so much confusion and deep felt emotion. And I'm going to bring this one up. This is a tough one, but as a trans partner, and I know because of being in community with trans parents, there is a grieving period too. There's grief, and a different kind of grief that I had never experienced before.
And it's interesting that you bring up the distance, because, back in the 70s, when I first tried the transition, the game plan was you leave everything behind and go to a new location and do your thing on your own, so that you get through it yourself without, other person's feelings being imposed on you. So that does enable you to deal with it on your own much easier.
And when we talked before, you both spoke about self-focus and, worrying about your own things. Jessika, you had issues to be concerned about and to deal with, and that you needed to be selfish about. And Adrienne, I think you said the same thing, that you both had to be selfish in your own ways about things. Talk about how that was for you and how you worked through that.
It's interesting what Wendy had just said about, being on your own. I mean, at first I thought, well, if I'm going to live this way, nobody's going to want to be around me, and I'm going to have to be on my own, and it would be easier to just start over than come out. I mean, I came out to everybody, to my industry, to my whole family. It would have been easier. And that sort of dovetails into this thing that I told myself early on when I decided what this journey was going to be, after Adrienne had given me the grace period to figure out where I was, and I worked with my therapist. I decided really quickly that I was going to do the whole thing, that I was going to transition. Before I made that decision, it was an innermost self coming to, and I asked myself, what are you willing to give up?
Exactly.
Which is a hard question. It's the first time I asked myself that ever. I don't even know how I knew to ask myself that. But I said to myself, sounds like I did lose my mind, that I was willing to give up everything. I was willing to give up our relationship. I didn't want to. I told her that when I went to Florida, I feel like I'm doing the most selfish thing I've ever done in my life. Here I am with my mom is sick. She's on her last months. The world is on fire. My job is, who knows where that is. Your mom is sick. Adrienne's mom is sick. Adrienne is dealing with that. And I'm coming down to Florida to say hey, guess what? I think I want to, be a woman for the rest of my life. It was horrible timing. And it was the most selfish thing I felt like I've ever done in my whole life, which includes horrible bouts of selfishness. We all have them sometimes, but it was explained to me that this wasn't unhealthy. It was explained to me from a point of therapeutic. My therapist was saying it's okay. I felt I couldn't do it because how can I do this right now? Like, what's wrong with me? I thought, when I had the moment of clarity, and I thought I was having, a clinger moment from MASH back in the 70s, speaking of the 70s, where like first sort of cross-dresser back then transvestite that I knew that was represented in prime time was, Klinger, who was on MASH. He was cross-dressing to deal with the trauma of being in the Korean War. I'm saying this for our other guests, not for you.
Younger generation.
Yeah, we all know who that is.
And he was trying to get kicked out.
He was trying to get kicked out, but he was also like dealing with the stress of that. And I thought that's what was going on with me. I thought, oh, I've lost it. And the way I'm dealing with like this different world that we all were living in then was I'm expressing myself as a female. And it wasn't that. It wasn't that. And it had to be a certain selfish. But I hope that I did it in a way for like my mom, who's not with us, and Adrienne's mom, and for Adrienne, I hope that I did it in a way where, it was the explanation I gave to Adrienne early on. I said, this thing is a freight train. It goes in one direction, and I don't think we could stop it.
Yeah.
I knew for me to do this, for me to feel who I am in the seat of self, I had to do the whole thing. I couldn't cross-dress. Those 3 or 4 months I cross-dressed, it drove me crazy because I didn't want to stop cross-dressing because it wasn't cross-dressing for me. It was identity. It was who I was, and like super selfish. But I feel at the end of it, I try to do it with a bit of grace and a bit of like latitude for others. And that's, in hindsight, I could see the latitude for others. It didn't feel that way. It did feel like a freight train, and I was willing to give up everything. And that's sometimes really hard to reconcile with, even now.
What a powerful feeling, though, to have that, to be willing to give up everything, knowing that this is what you had to do, especially giving up someone you love.
And that's basically what we all face.
Yeah, and in the midst of like, the whole climate then saying that like we were like a virus, or we were like crazy, or we were like, we being the transgender community, and I will say the people that support us, our allies, that there was something wrong. And it was like
delusional. That's what
you don't understand what's going on. You don't understand us.
Yeah.
I didn't want this. It wasn't a choice for me. And that's it's even hard for me to understand. Like, why was I given this? But it
all happens when we're born. All in utero is when it's all formed.
I don't have a better explanation for it.
So, Adrienne, what was your experience of this? Your situation, you're taking care of yourself, you're taking care of your mother. What are you doing for Jessika? I mean, all of this, what was your experience?
This is another trio where I am sort of in the middle. I usually call it caregiving in stereo. And I know initially Jessika was really adverse to she said, "You're not taking care of me." I said, "It's not that piece. I'm giving care. I'm offering."
Yeah, I was
care.
like, you're not
offering
caregiving. What are you talking about?
From the perspective of how we were caregiving for our mothers. It wasn't that, but it was certainly being in a position of giving care and advocacy and allyship. And what happened for me, my mom on one side, Jessika on another, and I would stay in Florida for the entirety of a year until I had enough of a system set up down there, supports that were there for when I could leave and come north and support Jessika as she was socially transitioning this whole time that I was away, but the medical transition was to begin. And I needed to be present for all of those experiences. But again,
she wanted to be, and I wanted her here too.
But going back to
some partners don't want to be.
very early on, it really occurred to me that I was in a state of triage, and it did feel like a fast moving train in respect to Jessika, in respect to my mom. We had no idea what the pace of that was, but her decline was really starting to happen. So there was a kind of urgency on both sides. And I knew that I felt called to give of myself as fully as possible to both of these human beings, which in turn had a certain kind of impact upon me, which was I grew somewhat lost in that outpouring of care. It's a tricky characterization because on one hand, I felt that I lost some agency, but on another, I was asserting agency because I had made that choice to stand firm in the role of caregiver, do what was required. And knowing that at some point in both cases, that things would change. And there would be a time when I would not be called to give upon all of my creative energies in these two directions. So when it came to taking care of myself, I didn't always do such a great job of that, I didn't. The classic caregiver syndrome, but knowing full well that I needed to find ways how to up my game on taking care. And so I would find what I would call the little ripples of joy that would come when I was still living in Florida full time with my mom, and Jessika and I were doing a lot of FaceTiming back and forth. And one piece I want to put out there is that we had promised for the we part of this journey that we needed to be rooted in absolute truth. Jessika and I have gone through some really hard things along the way, where truth wasn't present. There was deceit, trust was fractured, and we weathered those storms. We found the tools. We are people who double down on doing the work when work is required. We get the supports that we need, and we make discoveries about ourselves and about us in doing so. But I knew that we had to be completely honest with each other throughout. And sometimes that honesty was crushing for both of us. She wanted things that were crushing to me, and I wanted things that were crushing to her. But we were truth tellers to one another. And the reason why I'm bringing this up in this conversation about selfishness is that it is a sort of healthy selfishness, I think, for both individuals to tell the truth, even when truth is hard, But I found ways to have those little ripples of joy. We had the blessing of living on a beach in Florida at that time, and nature became a place where I could really refuel and revive. Being in the ocean water with the little fish and dreaming of the story that I wanted to tell someday about this time of living in caregiving in stereo. And there are stories in me that I want to bring forth and bring into the world because I believe that they may be stories that could help others.
When Adrienne says like caregiving in stereo, I want to add like advocacy also in stereo, because she advocated in Florida for the healthcare of her mom to the point where her mom was really taken care of really well. And, in our world that we live in right now in the States, you get what you ask for in healthcare or what you really advocate for. And Adrienne really helped her mom. And that was unbelievable, that sort of level of care from even your own daughter, in my opinion. But also advocacy for me and for trans people. She goes on to be more active in the trans community later, but like that advocacy, I think, is an important part. And she buries it sometimes. She buries the lead in, caregiving. Yeah, she was there for all of my surgical interventions and all of that. But like what meant more than that is just the day-to-day advocacy of like standing up for people and
Mm.
for our rights as trans people, and also almost more importantly, women.
So she's a great advocate.
Yeah.
We're very grateful that you are. Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, and you talked about peaks and valleys. We've talked a little bit today. When we talked before, you talked about peaks and valleys in your relationships and the things that you had overcome and the things that you had worked through. And I'm wondering if you've got a sense of how working through some of those other valleys gave you the tools or gave you strength or gave you hope or whatever it is. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but how did working through those things in the earlier part of your marriage equip you to either find the tools or to find within yourself what you needed to work through this transitioning?
And also, how much did that affect your personal growth as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We definitely had a tool bag from our previous challenges, but the tools that were there were very specific to certain kinds of situations. And we were in a scenario that was brand new to us.
Mhm.
But we felt that what we could draw from that tool bag was the remembrance again. And I said it earlier, that we are people who do the work. And so where we were lacking tools, we set out to find the ones that we needed that
Right,
were
exactly.
really geared towards this experience. And a
Mhm.
big piece of that is finding other people who are living this experience. You know, we aren't people who close off and isolate and live in a vacuum, but we both went out in search of community that spoke this language. So for Jessika, it was finding other trans people and people who were actively in transition, especially people who were transitioning later in life.
Yeah. And I found them. Yeah.
And for me, it was finding other trans partners and trans parents, people who were on this side of transition and reckoning with all kinds of conflicting emotions and feelings and states that we had never experienced before and were new to us. So we sought new tools. We pulled from the tool bag also, I'll draw this from the anonymous programs, experience, strength, and hope, right? We know that trio well, and we had evidence in our evidence box of faith that we had weathered outrageously challenging situations that we never thought we would overcome. And we did. We had the hard proof of that. So, and we look at the challenges in life as opportunities for growth. Now, why wouldn't we accept something that would expand our hearts, our minds, our souls to become more, to expand? So we knew that we were in the middle of that, even though sometimes it seemed like we were caught in the middle of a dark tunnel and we couldn't see either end. And we were grasping in the dark for the new tools. But we had this inner sense of faith, I'm going to liken it to, where we could lean into trust. And I would characterize both of us as spiritual beings, not religious, but spiritual. And we both leaned pretty hard into our spiritual leanings and sought spiritual guidance. And, you know, at one point I was
in therapy.
I was on a Zoom call. I was down in Florida and I was Zooming with our beloved Buddhist monks that we meditate with and join in community with here in our region. And I was having this conversation with them about Jessika's transition. It was kind of blowing their minds, but it wasn't, because they could draw back from Buddhist philosophy and teachings and bring stories forward. Because look, this has been around for as long as humans have been around. Everyone's likes to say, this is new. This is not new. This is not new. And so many cultures have embraced this understanding of this duality of gender. And, you know, we were probably far more accepting of it in other cultures and other times than we have come to be in the here and now. So I loved it when the monks could, pull things that were ancient forward and talk about it. Yeah.
I love that. I definitely agree with you. I follow Buddhism myself. I've really gotten into it over the last 11 years. It's all about how to live and how to be yourself. There's so much of importance in that. And I never got that out of Christianity.
So, what kind of support do you wish you'd had?
Yeah.
We both have something to
Um,
say towards that. I'm going to draw an example. What was very surprising to me we curated very carefully how to roll this out. I wanted to follow Jessica's guide on, who she wanted to share this news with first and who I wanted to share the news with first, and family, friends, colleagues. We had a whole timeline kind of mapped out, and we did it cautiously and thoughtfully. And in the process of sharing the news with both our families and friends, there were some friends on my side, mutual friends though, that were so alarmed for my well-being in this that it felt less than supportive of Jessica's journey when they were honing in so closely upon my well-being. And I appreciated that they were there in that kind of supportive manner.
I do too.
But at the same time, there was a sort of backhanded nature to it that I didn't feel comfortable with. But I knew that they were having their own experience, their journey with coming to know this person that had presented as male, now as female. And so there was confusion and complexity for them as well. And I wanted to give them space for that. But I needed to separate. It became so draining for me, I think is what I want to say. And so that support felt less than supportive, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And so I started to pull back from sharing my story as often and as frequently as I had been, because I was exhausted. I was already in triage, and then now I'm taking care of other people who aren't able to hold this. So I guess what this points to for me is that I wish we all, humans in general, had better knowledge and understanding of what this is, so that when this occurs in a loved one's life, that we could bypass all of that mess that happens, the withdrawal that happens, anger. There were people who were angry, angry at her, angry at me. It was very odd and disproportional at times. And she can speak more to family rejection, which we also encountered along the way. So I guess mine is an overarching theme. I wish we all knew more. It was just part of the tapestry of our lives that we knew and understood this, and this wasn't a thing that was, because that made it harder than it needed to be.
It's
So those
not part of our
external,
culture either.
Yeah.
so the external forces are the ones that, in addition to your individual and the we part of it, then you've got those external forces. And some people, we've heard parents say, why didn't my child tell me about this? Why didn't they explain it? People want others to explain it to them. And what you just described is there's enough of it going through the two of you and the relationship piece without having to have to deal with those people who are, critical or not supportive
Exactly.
in the way that's healthy for you. I want other people to understand that, because we're doing our part to educate people, and appreciate you educating people here too.
It's the reason why we, as a couple, advocate.
Yeah.
Because I think the more there is information out there, the more we share, it is our responsibility. I felt that from early on, that I didn't just want to transition and I don't know, do it publicly on the internet, make a big deal of it.
Mhm.
I wanted it to help somebody. And I
Yeah.
did that professionally. I did that in the workplace when DEI existed. I used DEI as a lever coming out in a corporate environment, which I thought was at the time was a good move, and it was. I would do it again in a moment. But, you know, to speak of like, you know, what I wish I had, um, maybe I think probably what I wish I had was a bit more time to sort of prepare the package for other people, you know? Uh,
Mm.
like I said, this thing was going to go, and it was a freight train, and sorry if you get injured, but don't stand on the tracks. I wish I had maybe more thought and tact in how to do this. I transitioned socially really quickly, right away, and then medically right away as well. And I think that has an impact on people. Um,
Her pace was breakneck. Yeah.
yeah, it was. And there were two schools of thought, actually. There were people that thought, what's wrong with you? Have you lost your mind? There are other people that said, oh my God, you're amazing that you know yourself so well that you can make this decision and carry through with it and put your life in it. And I was like, I know myself. And I know when this thing happened, there was no doubt in my mind as to who I was.
Exactly.
When you operate from that foundation, from that center, in whatever you do, like I'm unshakable. I have bad days where I just feel like the world sucks and it's against us or whatever. And I know that like it's okay because I'm living as myself. I have some people around here that love me, you know, and we have a great community of folks like the two of you here supporting our community. The three of you here, I should say, supporting our community, you know. And I think that's the responsibility. Maybe I wish I had more of a roadmap of how to advocate in the most wide reaching way. But I came up through a 12-step program, as you might have figured. And I think really what is important is exactly what I did before we started our interview today was I asked my spiritual center to direct my thoughts and actions so that I may be able to like say a word or something today that may help somebody. It could be one person. It doesn't matter. And I think as trans people in this environment, we want to help everybody. We want to create the thing that breaks through and like changes the whole globe and the transgender journey. And I think, you know, it could be one-on-one. It could be a transmission of a friend. It could be just, you know, noticing somebody out. It could be, I don't know, a donation to a trans cause, like whatever it is. It could be, you know, a smile. But yeah.
We'll go back uh, to Lynn's question about what support was lacking for you personally, specifically.
I mean, like what the support was lacking for me was, I don't know, a medical care navigator, which I found through a lot of um, being stubborn, you know, is the thing that I did. I said, this is going to happen. I'm going to have this done and I'm going to push my way through it. And that's how I did it. And I never took no as a final answer.
Was it difficult finding information and finding resources?
Yes, it was difficult finding ones that were relevant here in Pittsburgh. Like I could find national stuff, I could find it in other cities, but here it was really tough. And I mean, we're talking 6 years ago in 2020, 21. There weren't doctors here that were doing any procedures like trans healthcare procedures from, you know, an endocrinologist that specialized in it.
Interesting.
So I wish I would have had like maybe more connection that way, like in the medical journey. I think miraculously in the past 5 years, there's been a lot of movement towards that. I think it's been with the federal government trying to restrict our health care, where people are more aware of it, people meaning the trans community. I think that that is really changing, even as restrictions are trying to be put on us. It's more positive, I feel. But also, I looked for somebody that was like my age. I
Mhm.
found that person. I found a couple girls that age, and it's the old Reddit story. We find our people on Reddit. My trans mom, I found her on Reddit. She's a few years younger than me, but it's miraculous. Trans births can be backwards. There's no timeline. We can give birth when we're young to old people, and old people give birth to young or even older people. It doesn't matter.
Well, and
And
you're 6 years old.
exactly,
Right.
exactly. But I wish there was like there are a few organizations. I wish there was like all of these separate orgs. I wish there could be a homogeneous support system that is contiguous through the United States.
Mm.
Well, I just want to riff off of that for a moment too, because I went pretty early on in search of as much information as I could find from the trans partner perspective, and found so little at that moment. I read every book that had been written from this perspective. And again, very few, and many were written a lot longer ago, in yet another era. So I was looking for more current day information as well. I mean, a lot of the themes were the same, but I also wanted to find community. And when I first started seeking virtual community, because I was still away from home taking care of my mom, and I found a lot of negativity, I have to say. I found a lot of circles that were not really serving as support groups, but rather as places where people could bring their angst, yet there wasn't a whole lot of experience, strength, and hope being offered to transmute that angst into something productive, constructive, supportive. And so I stepped back then from finding community until I came back to Pittsburgh. And interestingly enough, and I'm not a big fan of social media, but sometimes that's where we find things. And
It is.
Jessika the algorithm had delivered something to her via Facebook. And she said, look, there's this support group for trans families starting up in Pittsburgh. And it came as a sort of this lovely golden delivery. And I sought it out immediately. It was a brand new thing, being offered by way of a therapeutic community. And it was formed by a young therapist. That's another interesting thing, right? Therapists that are our contemporaries don't have that much experience with this conversation.
We weren't recognized until 2012 by the medical
Right.
community and the therapeutic community. You
Exactly.
transitioned only 8 years after our recognition. I transitioned 3 years after.
So we look to the younger
Yeah,
generations who are living this from a much earlier age on, and
And in the therapeutic
in the
communities.
therapeutic community.
right.
And so this young therapist began this group because they saw a need for it when they fell in love and married a trans man and couldn't find this.
Mhm.
Also couldn't find this. So they wanted to bring this to those of us who were seeking this. And it became a lifeline for me. And there were partners in that group as well as parents. And this carried on for quite some time. And we were messy together. We found it was like a safe and safe space to
Yay.
bring our stuff instead of offloading it on my partner where that could
Right.
possibly cause harm. But put it on the table together, look at it collectively, because there are people in there saying, I've had that experience too. And even though it's with my child, I'm having that experience, or it's with my partner, I'm having that experience. And then we were creating our tool bag together. I mean, I feel like we're pioneering some of this stuff in the here and now.
Mhm.
And it really broke our hearts when the community came to a close, and I'm still not quite sure what happened. Something happened administratively with the group that was sponsoring it. But what I've done since it has closed down is, because I made a lot of friends through that. So I continue to meet in smaller groups, and I've developed new friendships with other trans partners, and we meet You know, we go out into the world and we talk about what's going on within our families, and we help each other so that then we go back to our families. We can show up in our better selves rather than in our, you know, bedraggled selves or confused selves,
Yeah, and
angry selves, whatever it is.
That's so nice to have that group having been started by somebody with lived experience.
That's right.
yeah,
That's
That
right.
is so critical to finding support and help for ourselves. Someone with lived experience.
so true.
You know, and I would find, I was talking to someone about this last night, the well-meaning friends, the ones who really have been by my side all along and bringing so much love, yet they haven't lived this experience. And so there is a bridge that they haven't crossed, and they can empathetically imagine or feel, but there's something, as you said, Wendy, about the lived experience that is unlike anything else.
Yeah, I think it's also like, we had mentioned, 12-step anonymous programs. And it is that thing that the most powerful tool that we have, the most powerful tool I think that I have as a trans woman is my story,
Exactly.
and the fact that we can share that one-on-one with another person or in a group setting, and it can be helpful. That's the thing. And that's the connection that we all look for. We look for that in a partner. We look for it in a friend. We look for it in a bowling league or whatever it might be, right? Like, and if I'm coming to you and I'm telling you, here are the things you need to do, and here's your bullet list. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nobody wants to hear that. But if I tell you what I did and my story and how I failed or how I succeeded and the journey and the shit or whatever it is,
Right.
it could be a learning and teaching moment that works both ways, but also like you could transmute where you've been to somebody that hasn't been there yet. And it's not saying, here's what you need to do, or here are the rules you need to follow.
Yeah.
Well, it's a powerful way. And some people need to hear that because they think they're the only one who ever, whatever, dot, dot, dot.
When I was a brand new young trans girl, I thought I was the first person ever in the history
of humans,
of all humans, to have an issue with body hair.
Oh,
like I wanted to get rid of all of it, especially facial hair. I thought I was the first one, and the first trans person. I said, "Oh yeah, like I had that too. Like my dysphoria, like that's where it started when I was like 12, and I was just like." You too? No way. And that's what we need is like,
yeah.
And I found that on, like I said, Reddit. I found it in person to person groups, yes, later. But this was pandemic. I found it on Reddit. I found it on Instagram. I found it in 12-step rooms that were specific for LGBTQ plus communities. I found my people. And it's the whole thing. When we find our people, it's the hard thing is that we need to look for the similarities in each other, not the differences. Because the differences are easy and we could push each other away with differences. I'm not a trans girl like you. I'm not a trans man like you. I'm gender binary. I'm not like, we don't need any of that. We each need to find it, whether you're anywhere you are on the rainbow. I think that the rainbow needs to be as big as possible and include the other flags, yes, but be as big as possible. And that's, I feel, where being a trans person, it's a responsibility. There's always the safety concern. There's always the, yes, but I can't do that. I can't be out. I can't be present. I can't be. But there are other ways where we can all help one another. And, like I said earlier, it could just be a one-on-one thing, one person.
Well, and you're sharing a more expansive view of the human experience. It's such a rich experience, and it's so unfortunate that people won't embrace that and won't open up to that. Because it seems to me like you've expanded your awareness of the human experience. Is that true?
Yeah, and I think that's it's all fear. It's fear of
Mm.
well, I don't know what's going to happen. Well, it's
Right.
well, nobody does in anything. And the most safe thing ever, nobody knows. And
Mhm.
So what would you tell people about dealing with fear? You've been through that numerous times.
God, I'm going to use this really corny an acronym. There's you know, was it? Fear everything and run. Um, face everything and recover. It's like the
Mm,
one in the 12-step community.
yeah.
I think that's where I am. I don't know if it's recover, face everything and, and live. I mean, fear is a state of mind as
Oh
much
yeah,
as anything. And, you know, it blocks us from being useful. It blocks us also from being ourselves.
absolutely.
I mean,
Mhm.
I had a sponsor who would say to me that, most people live lives of quiet desperation. It's a bleak statement,
But
Mhm.
it's true.
but it's so true. And
Mhm.
I never ever wanted to do that. We have one time around this world.
Hmm.
This is what I said to Adrienne when I said, it's a freight train and it's going to move and I want you with me. We have one go at this world. And when I'm given clear instruction of who I am, I'm going to take that and I'm going to go with that. I want to live my life now and not say, well, maybe later, or maybe I could, or it might be. Like,
Mm.
I'll riff off of
just do it.
and speak to the partner experience, going back to that freight train. And it was hard and fast, and I was continuously pacing behind, trying to jump up on that train and never quite grasping at the right moment. And it was almost as if I'll personalize the fear experience. I didn't have time for fear. I mean, and we know how much space catastrophic thought can take room in our beings.
Hmm.
And I literally didn't have time to live in the what ifs at all, because I was staying very focused on the moment. It was a very be here now occurrence. And I believe that that practice is important for all of us in respect to any kind of living, not just this experience, but it really served me well in that time, such that I personally wasn't fearful. I was dealing with a lot of other emotions, and fear was not a piece of that. And that's where the expansion of heart, mind, body, and soul took place. And
Hmm.
we know that we are still, and you use the term rare, we know that. We know that we are having a rare experience. There's something entirely beautiful and curious about that, knowing that we're living something that other human beings may never taste or savor or experience in any way in their lifetime. So that always makes me sit in the wonder and the awe of this experience, even when it's hard.
Hmm.
There is the light, there is the dark, it all works together. And this is a rare human experience that we're having.
What a beautiful thing to share. What what surprises you about your lives?
It's a great question. Because there's a lot. Jessika, when she presented as a male, and I had talked to you before about the feminine masculine qualities that I noted in her. Yet I also noted there was a wall. There was, she would allow me into a certain place. And then there was a wall. And I caught glimpses of another being peeking out from behind that wall every now and then. The
Hmm.
first time I saw her cry. It's good. And other things along those lines that would fall under the feminine principle. But there was a lot of guardedness. And when transition began, I noticed that the wall was crumbling. And what was behind the wall?
Empathy.
Empathy. She knew it. I knew it. We saw it. She didn't know what to do with it. It was wild and unbridled and free and wanted to roam all over the place. And I know it was kind of wrecking you because it's not a controllable substance. It is a way of being. As time has gone on, she has become much more schooled and skilled in living with and working with empathy. And what that has allowed for within our relationship is opportunity, number one, to go back and work on some stuff we had still been dragging along that hadn't been fully repaired, still fractured instances of fractured trust that were still hanging about, hangovers from past occurrences, but also in the here and now. We work with a wonderful, again, much younger than we are, family therapist. And this particular therapist works with people like us, where one individual has transitioned and the other has gone through their own transition because of that transition. So working with couples like us and speaking this common language, and in our work, and we've done some really deep work there, deeper than we've ever gone in other family therapy encounters that we've had. The empathy has evolved our relationship into a much more, what can I say, filled out three-dimensional thing. There's something about long-term relationships. You grow to know that person so well. There was so much new to get to know in this reveal of her empathetic depth that had been conditioned out of her by way of male conditioning.
Right.
Yeah. So
I was waiting for you to get to that one.
That was something that has surprised me about this whole thing.
That surprised me too.
Jessika, what about you?
What has surprised me in a lot of really amazing ways is people's willingness and help, from my partner to my family to former coworkers, friends. What surprised me is some of my male friends going away, seemingly permanently. They don't talk to me anymore. And what doesn't surprise me is how remarkable and awesome 90% of the women are in my life. I mean, we were just at a party last night, a postmenopausal party, which I can be postmenopausal anytime I want to stop taking it. I go immediately into it. So it's amazing the amount and the depth, and it surprises me. I knew it when I was a kid, looking back at like my 5 aunties sitting around with hair tint in their hair, bitching together and talking, that was empathy and female friendship that I was seeing. Something I didn't grow up understanding, because I understood it, but I wasn't able to experience it, I think, in the way that I wanted to experience it. And I think that that's what transition has allowed me to do. And, I think that's really what surprised me most. Yeah.
Yeah. This has been such a wonderful conversation. We could talk for another couple hours. I would love to hear more.
Absolutely.
But before we wind up, is there anything else that either one of you wants to say, wants to share, wants people to know?
I think I may have offered this when we had our initial conversation, and I'd like to share to the larger community. And this is something that came out a month before my mother passed away. And we didn't talk a lot today about how our mothers actually experienced this change, but both her mother and my mother had their own journeys with this at the very end of their lives. And it was a sort of amazing blessing to be able to come out in this way to our moms and be fully seen. And, my mother passed at the age of 96, and her mom was 87. If an 87-year-old and a 96-year-old can get it, everybody can get it. But the piece that I want to share is an experience that we had. Jessika was visiting my mom for the last time that she would be awake and aware and conscious, and a month before she passed away. And interestingly, my mom, who one of her survival mechanisms in life was putting on a very hard exterior and keeping a lot of her fragility and vulnerability behind that wall. We always would say, my mom and Jessika are really alike, when she was presenting as a male. Why are they so similar? But that had something to do with it. And my mother's wall also melted in the last few years of her life. And it was astonishing to watch this. All of us who were part of Team Big A, we called ourselves, all of us who were taking care of her. And we saw it before our very eyes. This woman melted into this soft and gentle child. And she was beautiful and vulnerable, and her face changed. It became younger and much more open to the world, and she was discovering new things even within the state of dementia, which was one of her conditions. So Jessika was visiting. My mom was sitting in her turquoise blue throne, her lift chair, and I could see her welling up. I knew she was about to cry. So I rushed over to her and I'm like, Mom, what's going on? And our beloved friend and caregiver, Charisse, was there that day, and I called Charisse over. So we were flanking her and my mom just burst into tears, and she's watching Jessika walk back and forth in another part of the apartment. And she said, we didn't think she was gonna stay. And both Charisse and I knew in that moment what my mom meant. She didn't mean Jessika. She meant me. Because my mom's big fear, we'll go back to fear, was that Jessika and I would divorce, and we both would be alone in the world, and we would not have stability for this chapter in our lives. And I think she genuinely thought that I was going to leave this marriage. And so, I just grabbed her hand and I said, no, Mom, I'm still here. Jessika and I are still together. And I called Jessika over. And my mom had this way of giving all of us who were around her at that time her final life guidance. She had been a career educator, and she loved to teach us all, even if it was things that we didn't need to be taught. But she was teaching us all. And she looked at Jessika and she gave her final, what do I want to say, big Aism. And she put her hand out and touched Jessica's face and said, you are so very beautiful, and your mom would be so proud of you.
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
She made this beautiful circle of evolution. And, a month later, she would pass very quietly and peacefully. And we all were there, and with a solid understanding in her heart that we were intact as a family.
Yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you. Jessika, any last words? Anything you want to share?
Yeah. I'd like to maybe throw a lifeline out to anybody out there that's struggling, and you're not alone. It feels like that in the beginning. I felt like I was alone. I felt like I was losing my mind. And find somebody, contact us, contact Wendy, contact someone, go online, find a trans support group in your area, and be safe. It's the one thing I need to say to everybody who's in our community, and even advocates, is just to be safe.
Right.
Think about what you're doing before you do it. I also want to say, let's all think about what we're sharing online. I know there's a lot of trans joy. There's a lot of I get a lot of trans euphoria in some of the things I share. And I've also sort of just been taking inventory on how I'm representing us, all of us. Not that we have to stand guard, but I think as adults and as members of a community that's somehow under siege and somehow misunderstood, even though we've been here forever, it's a responsibility in us to, as we've always heard of leaving the world a better place than how we found it. I would like to do that for the trans community, for leaving the space for the next person that has their egg cracked late in life to feel okay about it. You know, that it's going to be okay. That you don't need to do all of it, or you don't need to do one step, or you don't need to conform, that you're okay the way you are. And yeah, I just want to offer that hope. And I feel that our future as a community of people is going to improve.
Well, by sharing your stories, you're going to help that. You are helping that.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you being out there. And
thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Thank you both, and for being the kinds of advocates and allies that you are, by showing up and creating this forum for this to happen. And we need more of this. You know, we're living natural lives. We are. And to be able to sing out about the joys as well as the struggles, it's the human
Absolutely.
experience. Yes.
Yeah, that's all part of it, isn't it?
That's
yes,
really
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wendy, anything else before we wrap up?
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for
Thanks for
coming on and having this conversation with us. This has been amazing. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
So you've been generous in offering to help other people. How can people reach you?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram, and I think you're also putting my website in. It's my professional website, but Instagram is the best place. Send me a message.
Okay.
And you can find me on Substack. I create a publication called The Golden Boat, where I often share stories from this experience that we're having, and on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook.
All right. We will put those URLs in the show notes. And if people can't find those, they can always contact us through our website. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has just been a remarkable conversation today. So, you know, as we're wrapping this up, there's something I keep coming back to. And we think about transition as one person's story, you know, personal journey and identity. But, you know, Jessika and Adrienne, you've shown us that it's so much more than that. It's layered, it's relational, it's ongoing.
Yeah.
It asks difficult questions, not just to the person transitioning, but to the people who love them. Questions like, who am I now? Who are you now? And who are we becoming together? As you talked about those three journeys. And what stands out isn't that your path has been easy, because it hasn't. We know that. And it's that you've chosen again and again to stay present, to stay curious, and as you said, to do the work, whatever that involves, to do the work, hang in there, fear, joy, whatever it is, stay with it. And maybe that's an invitation for all of us, not just conversations around gender, but every relationship that we care about. Listen more deeply, hold the space for change, and recognize that growth, real growth, often happens in this uncertainty that we don't know what's going to happen. I think Adrienne had said earlier that it happens in the mystery. And it's that mystery, that's where we expand as souls. So Jessika, Adrienne, thank you for your honesty, for your courage, for your willingness to let us into your story. And really, it's a story of hope and courage. And it's a story that will stay with people. Our audience appreciates that. And we appreciate our listeners. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. Wendy and I thank you so much for being here, for subscribing to our channel, sharing these stories, leaning into these conversations, and for continuing to expand your understanding of the world and the people in it, of this whole human experience. So until next time, stay curious and stay kind. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of our fascinating interviews. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. So until next time, stay curious and stay kind.